This clip.
Can you count, sucker?
That had to be a lot of fun to put together. I'm jealous. But an increase in great work that is outside the traditional box is the upside argument I'm making for replacing this metric. But the inverse is also true. The downside for not replacing this metric is actually an increase in work that doesn't work so well. So I want to let you in on sort of a dirty little secret some of you may know. Cheating the system to appear to be efficient is actually quite easy to do. The three ways I'll highlight is first, over-investing in traditional. Now, traditional, especially TV, is still very effective. But if you're over-investing and spending more than your consumers are spending there, or is really effective to reach them, that's the easiest way to keep working versus non-working. Even within digital, buying banner ads where the cost of producing the ad is actually quite low relative to the total media buy is another way. Of course, banners are becoming less and less effective, and I don't think would make anybody's list for being breakthrough. And the third, which might be the least well known, is having media properties perform agency services like creative and content creation. The working versus non-working metric is unwittingly the largest driving force behind media properties adding agency services without the corresponding fiduciary interest to act in the marketer's best interests. And the reason is because the cost of providing those agency services can be buried within the insertion order on the CPM. So it doesn't fall under the working media definition. Because you have to ask yourself, are media properties really more efficient at doing creative than agencies? Or are the costs just categorized differently? So you might be asking yourself, if non-working versus working isn't the right answer, what is? Well, I'm sorry to report, I haven't discovered a simple and clean metric to replace it. But rather, in talking with lots of marketers and agencies across the spectrum, what seems to make the most sense is holding the marketing lead and the agencies to an overall ROI goal. Simply put, is the business moving and the key business metrics moving the way they should be without imposing channel-specific allocations or an overall artificial efficiency metric. With Oscar Mayer, we knew what the goals of the program need to be. We knew what our overall budgets were. Within that framework, it was largely up to us and our marketing client to come up with a plan. And we think that's the best approach. But you shouldn't just take my word for it. The world's largest marketer, P&G, was just mentioned, no longer uses the term non-working. So my closing argument in this section would be, if you think the fees you are paying your agency are non-working, you have a very simple remedy. You can fire your agency. Right? There are plenty of us out there. But holding all agencies and holding all your marketing campaigns to this metric is actually counterproductive to reaching your business objectives. So that brings me to second myth. Social media is cheap. The cost of producing content in social media is cheap. The thinking goes, and I've heard this countless times, is that an intern or my 13-year-old can post on Facebook or Instagram, so why are you agencies charging me so much? Well, the answer is it's definitely true that the cost of doing bad work in social media is next to nothing. That is absolutely true. I have a 13-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter, and they're incredibly advanced on Instagram or Facebook, but I wouldn't trust them with my brand. Great content and with an on-brand social tone of voice, visuals that inspire sharing, and fostering a community that nurtures brand love is far from trivial or easy to produce. In fact, I'd argue it might be harder than anything we have to do as agencies. Many brands have spent a considerable amount of time and effort over the last few years building up social media communities. I would say comparatively that is the easy part. The harder part is how do you keep them engaged? Put the opportunity in context. Coke has amassed an audience on Facebook of over 64 million. That's orders of magnitude larger than Monday Night Football. Now, granted, they're not all connected at once. But the main point is that there's an audience there that are reachable whenever a brand has something interesting to say or show. Now here's the challenge. You have to have something interesting to say or show, or they can and will rebel. And that's the opportunity and the challenge. In fact, the cost of engaging consumers in social media has gone up the last few years as the market has become saturated. 2008, it was relatively wide open. Today, there are 50 million branded Facebook pages. And that's not the only competition. You're not just competing with those and your direct competitors. You're competing with your friends' wedding pictures, baby pictures, and those adorable cats that are all over the internet. A few years ago, posts were largely text-based. Today, visual content is required to break through. And media dollars are often necessary to amplify engaging content. I want to talk about Oreo for a second, a client of ours. They have gotten a lot of credit for their work in social media, helping turn a 100-year-old iconic brand into a digitally iconic brand in just a number of years. In particular, Oreo's received a lot of attention for the blackout tweet that happened during the Super Bowl, and a lot of questions about how this happened. So I'm going to show this video, and then we'll talk a lot more about that story. So getting to a place where Oreo was positioned to be a real-time brand was not an overnight sensation. This is something that required building up a very strong foundation over a period of 3 years, including a robust community, a unique tone of voice that gave it permission to be part of culture, as well as some of the more mundane but equally critical things about aligning budgets, aligning agency relationships, and getting legal on board so that they would be in a position during the Super Bowl of actually being able to approve an ad in 5 minutes. So unequivocally, the cost of engaging consumers in social media has gone up. But I would pose this choice. If your consumers are there, what is the choice in terms of not engaging? Or how do you go about approaching it? Brands could stay within text and not support it with media, but that would be like a tree falling in the forest. Or you could cut corners, but in doing so in social media is incredibly dangerous. We've seen a lot of examples. Here's one from Gap, where things can go terribly wrong if not well thought out. We recommend to marketers that they either go big or they go home, as it's more damaging in social media to do it poorly than not at all. And each marketer has to decide whether you can afford to stay home while forward-looking brands develop deep presences in social media and acquire valuable learnings. So while social media can have an impact big or bigger than working media, the cost of success is neither free nor cheap by intern standards. And that brings me to the third myth. Patent infringement is an incredibly hot topic these days, and for good reason. It's not the sexiest of topics, but it's an incredibly important one. It is a common myth that obtaining patent indemnification from your agencies protects your business. Now, it may in the short term, but I'm going to explain the damage to the long term. The reality is this prophylactic step is preventing the kind of innovation that can rapidly and profoundly change businesses at a time when it's especially critical for a lot of us. The general consensus, I think, for any of us who are dealing with patents is that the process is poorly suited for the current environment. It's complex, it's painfully slow, and it's fraught with unavoidable risks, often due to patent trolls. In case you're not familiar with the term patent trolls, those are businesses that the sole business they're in is acquiring patents and then enforcing them. In fact, more than half of all patent infringement cases last year were from trolls, many in a single court jurisdiction in Texas. So I want to show two pieces of innovative work that I think will bring some context to both the opportunity and the lost opportunity as it relates to patent infringement. First is called Sneaker Hijack, which demonstrates how an upstart competitive retailer is using a mobile app to literally steal customers from the competition. Roll the video.
We created Hijack, an enhancement for the...
And the next case study I want to show is from Dubai. It's called Pizza Hotline. And it literally will show how digital technology has transformed a local business into a global one. Let me roll this video. So what these both have in common, aside from being transformational ideas led by digital, is they both happened outside the US. And we're seeing more and more great ideas happening internationally. I don't believe it's because companies are more innovative outside the US. I think this is a direct cause and effect from both the patent laws and the way that agency marketer contracts are structured. If you just think about that pizza example, if the agency came up with that idea and trying to research whether or not that would infringe one of the 250,000 patents pending on smartphones would take literally months and probably six figures. And at the end of the day, you still wouldn't be able to figure out if it infringed anything. So my assertion is that the patent infringement threat and the way that client agency contracts are structured are stifling a lot of innovation in this country. So why is this coming to a boiling point now between marketers and agencies? Three main reasons. One, creative and technology in agency relationships are now intertwined. Agencies now are routinely producing digital work. Digital work involves software code. The more immersive and mobile the experience, the more likely that it carries a risk of an uninspected patent infringement. The second, which is a critical point for everybody to understand, it is nearly impossible to know what's out there. The way the US patent system works, there is an 18-month lag between a patent being filed and it being published for those to see. As such, it's literally impossible to perform a search and clear a patent. Impossible. And as I just mentioned, there's 250,000 patents on smartphones. Figuring out which functionality may actually have a patent on it is incredibly difficult. And the third is that the contract and compensation model is not aligned for agencies to take this risk. Most of you are generally paying your agencies for time and materials, the cost to produce an idea, with the marketer retaining full ownership over the end product. There's generally not any line item for absorbing risk or a margin to do so. And there's no reliable form of patent insurance for us to acquire. So I believe, we have to ask ourselves, where do we go from here? This is a really sticky problem. There's a lot of discussion about legislation pending, and clearly we can hope that happens, but we all know it's pretty dysfunctional in Washington. So the question becomes, what do we do now in the meantime? I believe there's a middle ground between those on the agency side who say agencies are agents and therefore should assume no risk, and those on the client side that say agencies' job to know the risks associated with the ideas they're bringing forth, and therefore they should stand by them. I'd argue that the cost of lost innovation far outweighs the cost of finding a fair way to allocate risks and costs between the marketer and agency from patent infringement. The 4As has laid out some clear principles, and we have Tom Finner in here, and I'm sure this will come up during Q&A, so he will help me kind of address some of those. But the key takeaway is that in the absence of a more balanced approach to patent risk, marketers have unintentionally incentivized agencies to bring safe ideas to the table, which we absolutely do not want to do. In an increasingly mobile and digital world, and safe often means unremarkable, and unremarkable generally does not equate to breakthrough business results. So, in conclusion, this is the golden era for marketing, with more possibilities for creating and engaging consumers than ever before, for literally transforming businesses. Consumers, the pace of change has rapidly outstripped the way we're moving as an industry. And if we, working in partnership, marketers and agencies, can restructure the way we work together, we have a real opportunity to deliver amazing business results and help transform relationships with consumers. So if you remember nothing else from my talk, here are the three kind of key takeaways. The first is Let's replace the working versus non-working metric with an overall channel agnostic ROI. 2, each of you needs to decide whether social is critical for your business, and if so, work with your agency to figure out what it's going to take to invest to win. And the 3rd is we need to work together to structure a fair approach to patent infringement risk so that we can encourage innovation. Thank you.
In each of the aisles, or you can text. Actually, do you mind if we take a seat,
Sure.
Bryan? I think it's better for us. Before we get started with some of the audience questions, while I try my best to eat healthy, I do have to say that bacon is my weakness.
You're not alone.
That was an outstanding campaign. What were some of the challenges in selling this campaign, because it was so out of the box, to Oscar Mayer, or were they open to this?
Not only were they open, they encouraged it. And we're really fortunate to work with Oscar Mayer in that they have rethought the way they approach this and have really encouraged us to bring ideas.
Now, in partnering, in building the relationship with Oscar Mayer, did you work with the sourcing team, or was it solely marketing?
In that case, we definitely worked with sourcing in terms of how we kind of put together and once the idea was sold. But in terms of actually developing the plan, that was directly with the marketing group, all the way up to the CMO of Oscar Mayer.
Great. Oh, that's excellent. So Mattel, as you know, we work closely with 360i, and we tend to spend quite a bit in traditional arenas, mostly due to our demographic of children, and which I'm sure you're intimately familiar with now. So for companies, and it looks like you work with others who do a lot of work with children as well, Oreo and Oscar Mayer as well. For companies that are struggling with innovating and taking risk, we've talked a lot about that over the past few days, and it's either due to risk aversion or maybe legal challenges or concerns due to lack of insights on digital success metrics. What advice would you give them for opening those doors, and for procurement professionals who have to work with marketing, and for marketing that have to sell finance, et cetera? What advice would you give them in opening these doors, and maybe some success that you've had with Oreo or with Oscar Mayer?
It's a great question, and it's neither simple nor easy. It takes time, but I'd say that the number one thing is we welcome bringing our clients into the tent, and you just listed a lot of different constituents that are required to be successful, and I think that's absolutely right. So sourcing needs to understand, the marketing clients need to understand, legal, finance. To us, what we found the most success is inviting our clients and the different constituents to our office to really bring them up to speed, not only in the work we're doing, but also showing some of the cases that we've seen and bringing them forth and getting them involved in the process. I think what we see is that when businesses and the different constituents are more comfortable with how the world's changing, then they're more bought into the fact that, yes, there has to be some calculated risk-taking in order to see success. Legal was a huge part. If you think about all the work that Oreo does in being culturally relevant, it requires a lot of rapid response. Clearly not everything 5 minutes, but much faster than would be the normal process for clearing an ad. And so bringing legal into the tent and getting them bought off is an essential component, and that goes for all the other stakeholders.
Oh, that's excellent. I think we'll go. I think it's actually Kim Tasting.
Hi, Bryan. This is
Hi.
Kim Tasting with Mattel. Question for you, and it kind of piggybacks off of what you were just discussing. I'm interested to hear kind of what are some of the attributes of the partnership with a client like an Oreo that lends itself to kind of that rapid response. Some of our challenges when we kind of tap into social media is, it's not just a legal problem, but, it's one of the hurdles in being able to have real-time response. And so how were you able to partner with an Oreo to allow for kind of that real-time response? What are some of the attributes in that partnership that we can take away and bring back to our businesses to say this is what your outcome is going to be? These are some of the qualities that we need to have internally.
Sure. I think before you think about how do you be a real-time brand, because after the Super Bowl there's a lot of discussion about brands wanting to do that. I think the much more important question is, what do you want your brand to stand for in social media? How do you want to engage consumers? How do you want them to think about you? So the first step is really figuring out that strategic brief. So you really have to look before you leap. I'd say real time is sort of at the end of that that continuum. The first step is, who is your target consumer? How can you actually engage them? Do they want to be engaged? How are you adding value to their life? Because I think the biggest fundamental shift that marketers have to go through is, it's not what you want to say to them, it's what they want to hear from you. And so you figure that out, and the number one thing we do first is, after that strategic brief, we then look and say, let's do a social tone of voice workshop, which certainly has to piggyback on the attributes of the overall brand voice, but it has to be customized for the social arena. And once that happens, then you can start to say, all right, let's try some things and let's see what works and doesn't work. So it's a journey of figuring out what resonates, what doesn't. And ultimately, your target consumer has to give you permission to be in their life. And I think there have been a lot of examples, especially recently, of brands kind of forcing their way into culture. And you really have to be invited into culture. And there's a methodical process to doing that.
That's a great point. Yesterday, Jeff Jacobs of McKinsey spoke, and we were tweeting. So we have a pound ANA AFM as our tweet tag here. So we're able to tweet as we go, and Jeff got a lot of feedback around creative briefs, and the creative briefs needing to be strategic and clear and giving that direction. So this is a great point. It's, again, tying to, there's a lot of questions around the patent and risk language.
Yeah, they're rolling in.
Yeah.
I'd actually like Tom Finneran from the 4As to deal with this. Tom, there's a couple of questions, maybe I'll bundle them for you, but one is, what is a fair approach to patent risk language? And the second would be, what are some of the solutions to sharing patent troll risk between clients and agencies? Are there any success stories that you might be able to share?
I think Bryan did an excellent job of choreographing the incredible opportunities that we have in this digital era. Digital and interactive activities are going to continue to grow. The opportunities for innovation are limitless. However, as that growth occurs, we're going to see even more activity from patent assertion entities. We have a circumstance now where many clients take the view, well, this is an agency problem. Agencies take the view, this is a client problem. The vast majority of patent assertions are placed against the marketer because it's you're the face of the work that is most available to the troll. The truth of the matter is, this is our problem and we must collectively work on it. In terms of the current status of the patent assertion entity problem, I'm going to ask you to do a little homework. There's a report that was issued a couple of weeks ago by the Congressional Research Service. It's called An Overview of the Patent Trolls Debate. It's available on www.crs.gov. It's a 20-page write-up of the dynamics in the patent system and some suggested solutions to help curtail patent assertion entity activities. So if you think this is just Bryan and I choreographing an agency bitch session, there's a much broader universe of discussion here. I would urge you to reach out to Bill Duggan and Bob Leodis and Dan Jaffe and urge collaboration with other associations on a three-prong approach to address the patent assertion problem. The first prong is a coalition is being established, led by the 4As, to address regulatory, judicial, and legislative solutions to the patent assertion problem. That coalition is just being formed. The DMA, the MMA, the Retail Federation, certain media companies have joined in that coalition, and we would urge the ANA to participate as well. Legislation and judicial change moves slowly and probably appropriately so that there are not unintended consequences. There are intermediate actions we would also suggest. Bill and I had a small task group meeting between a select group of A&A members and 4A's members to talk about some intermediary steps that we could take in the area of information sharing and identifying risks that might relate to marketing-related patent assertions, as well as perhaps even sharing activities in the area of discovery. We would welcome your participation and support on that. Short term, we need to come together and establish equitable, proportionable, fair, and reasonable indemnities between marketers and agencies. I have a question for you. This is for just the marketers in the audience. How many of you currently have any form of marketing communication on a mobile device? Could you just raise your hand? Yeah, I will guarantee you are infringing patents. Bryan showed an excellent example, I think it was from Dubai, of the pizza on a mobile device that had a ad messaging in a text message. There's a company called HealthRich that claims that they own the patent to that, and if that were used here in the United States, you would receive an infringement letter. How many of you have any form of communications that have a web link? There are assertion entities out there claiming they have patents on that. How about QR codes? Same circumstance. So this is a systemic problem. I think collectively there's a lot that we can do. There is legislation. Chuck Schumer is introducing legislation that makes it easier to challenge a patent upon a patent being issued where it is the community feels it is not something new or novel, and we would ask you to join with us on some of these coalition activities so that we can do that more productively.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
I'll take, there's one question here about the media, and I think the question was, should we go back to the day when media was bought through the agency and they created and produced the ad for free? I'm very pro-media. My agency, we buy over $600 million worth of media a year. So for an agency our size, that's pretty significant. But I think that would be an example of a structure that would actually incentivize bad behavior, because that would incentivize buying more media in order to be compensated. It's really important that we have a channel-agnostic framework in terms of compensation. Media should be thought of, you have to think of earned, owned, and paid media. And you don't want to have a compensation model that thinks about paid media first. And that's one of the problems with working versus non-working, is it really favors a lot of media support. Now, that might be the right move for certain programs. That's certainly the right move for you're an e-commerce site and you want to drive a lot of sales. That would be a heavy media, heavy search campaign. But that may not be appropriate if you're trying to engage consumers in social media. In fact, it almost never is. That's a very much an earned and owned led, where paid media is a supporting actor. So I would say that you should think about the way you structure your compensation with agencies and see if that actually creates a bias towards a certain form or action. It doesn't matter what the bias is, and I think in general that would be a mistake. I think we're running out of time, but I just wanted to... The
next two, we could probably combine the next two. I think we have time for one more. So,
okay.
It's talking basically about the compensation approach. So, what approach would you take in the compensation models that enable better digital innovation and partnership?
Well, I think ultimately enlightened agencies are all for performance-based models. I know we certainly are. I think the challenge has been, how do you arrive at the metrics that are transparent and that everybody can get comfortable with? And the marketer has to be willing to say that if the program does phenomenally successful, that actually the fees can go up. It can't be a performance model that has lots of downside and no upside. Failing that, I think that structuring around a deliverable and what that should cost, whether that's people-based or effort-based, is okay. It's not perfect, but it's okay, provided that it does not incentivize any one particular action. I think what the most important thing, and I touched on this earlier, is I think you should ask your agencies to come visit them and really dig into how the donuts are made and whatever activity they're doing. I think any agency should welcome that kind of transparency. We've seen a lot of success with that. And by visiting and spending time with them, I think it really sets the table for a much better partnership between the marketing community and the agencies.
And Oreo was physically in your office, were they not?
For that,
Right.
for that particular event, absolutely. But,
Great example.
So, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Bryan.